As a marine artist, my specialty is sailing ships. When I, for inspiration, once I've decided what subject matter, what ship it's going to be, I look into all aspects of its history, and then I do a few rough sketches initially to get the idea in my mind. From that I've got to find out the direction of the wind, the tide movement, the order the ships might be coming to anchorage or whatever. This first sketch is just a little rough sketch for my actual idea, initial idea. Then from that, from whatever models that I find of the particular vessels, I scale them up to minute scale and arrange the painting and compose it exactly how I want the finished painting to be. From that I might also do smaller details of particular subject matter, like this particular little longboat sailing in the stern. I've detailed that up in more accurate detail, and from then on the painting takes shape. From this initial drawing I transpose it to my painting board with tracing paper. This next one will probably give you a better idea. This is a picture of a clipper coming up Port Phillip Bay in Victoria. It shows the very early progress. I use masonite as a base. I prepare my masonite with about 10 coats of acrylic white undercoat, one vertical and one horizontal. After I've got 10 coats on it, then I sand it down fairly smoothly, because I need a smooth, very smooth surface to paint on. Initially I do the sky. That's the first thing I do, and in my style with acrylics, everything I do is finished as it goes along. So the sky is completely finished. Then the background comes into being. The land in the background, Point Nepean, and on this side Point Lonsdale, that is completely finished. And then I do the water just in the background and up to the foreground where the actual ship sits in the water. Then from that, from my master drawing of this clipper, the Lightning, I transfer a pencil outline of the whole sails and the hull. And as you can see there, I've just blocked in the hull and have started to work up the detail in the hull. After I've finished the hull, then I'll do the sails, the masts, the rigging, etc. I always like to work from a model of the particular ship that I'm painting. If that's not possible, a model of a similar vessel. In this instance I found a very accurate model of Lightning, and I took a slide, and from that that was my initial source that I did the actual painting from. So I've photographed that at the angle which I work from. This shows the scaled up drawing that I did from the model. Of course the model doesn't show the sails, so you've got to put the sails on the yards, and also the yards actually slide up in each position. So you've got to have a good knowledge of the ships themselves to know which ones slide up and which are fixed. These other sails are added on, they're called stunsels or studding sails, and they were the forerunner of the modern spinnaker. Was extra footage that was set, sail footage that was set when running downwind, or any wind that was slightly after the beam. So, and then from this particular drawing I'll do a tracing and transfer each piece stage by stage to my actual painting board. First, as you've seen, I've transferred the hull on, then I've modelled that up, and then the next stage will be to paint in the sails, and the last thing would be the rigging. With my first fleet painting, the research that I had to do was quite a large amount. First of all, after deciding which anchorage and the actual scene itself, the background here shows the west side of Circular Quay as it was when the fleet came in. In order to get this accurately, I had to base this on an early lithograph of 1812. Also, I prefer to work from a model of a ship. In this case, the Supply and Sirius are very good models in the local museum, which I based them on. The rest of the ships, which is only a very brief description, only had to comply with the actual rig and the short description, whether she was a brig, ship or a bark, whatever the rig happened to be. So as long as I had the era of sailing ship here, I couldn't be proved wrong. But most of all, my work has got to be very accurate. Marine painting is not really like a landscape where the artist can go out and work on site. All marine art is mainly research work, so and studio work. So you've got to have a very profound knowledge of the ships and the subject that you're working from, apart from the actual technique of actually painting them. So all accuracy is the main thing. I always like to feature somebody I know in my paintings. This particular longboat here I based on a vessel that we've got in the Woodside Maritime Museum, and all the volunteers in this are from the Woodside Volunteers. So there's half a dozen chaps in this longboat who I personally know, and I've got a likeness to most of them there. With research, with this particular one, all the vessels came into anchor around Circular Quay, or Sydney Cove as it was then, just before dark. My favourite medium is acrylics. In particular, I use Liquitex. I found they're very good, and I've used them ever since I started using acrylics, which I think 1965 they came on the market here in Australia, and I've been using them ever since. They dry very quick, obviously. Some people don't like them, but I've suited my technique appropriately. They suit my fine work, my detail work, and the quick drying is an asset to me, because I need to for it to dry quickly so I can get on to the next part of the painting, where in transferring a pencil line to it. When I have a colour that I want to retain for the whole duration of the painting, which could be 6 or 12 months in my case, I mix it up in a palette, and then I cover it with plastic wrapping to keep the air out, and that way it'll retain its the same consistency right through. I just take a little bit out of my plate and then put it on the palette and use it direct from there, and then I cover it each time so that it doesn't dry out. As you can see, this is another one, a special colour I've mixed up for the sky, for this background, and I only take a little bit out as I want it. I'll keep this right to the end of till the painting's finished, in case I want to touch something up right at the completion of the painting. I use fine sable hair brushes for the fine detail. And it's got to be a new brush for this minute detail here. I also use a magnifying glass for the fine detail. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so I use this as an aid. And the brush has got to be a new brush, taping to just a few fine hairs, and of course this is what takes the time. Most of my paintings take up to at least 600 hours, some 1500 hours to do, so that's where the time comes in, is the fine detail. I use a range of brushes from fine sable hair for the very fine detail, going right through to the big bristle brushes to block in the broad areas of the sky. They're the only areas that I use the bristle brushes, is for the sky and for the broader areas of the water. Another good quality with acrylics is with their quick drying capacity, also they're odourless. So when you're doing fine work and pouring over the painting for very long hours, it must be a healthier prospect also. This painting is my unfinished symphony. I painted this initially in 1966 and I haven't touched it since, so that's nearly 20 years. I put it down for a big commission and I've never got back to it. Always something else has come up. But this painting is 6 feet long and I'd spend 1,000 hours on it. It'll give you some idea how I go about doing the painting. In the background, it's a picture of 2 clippers, the aerial and Taiping. It depicts the finish of a famous tea race from China to England with the tea, and there were 6 tea clippers actually came in on the one tide. This shows Ariel and Taiping racing up the channel. Ariel is the one in the foreground. The one in the background, which at the moment is just a ghost, is Taiping. As you can see, I've done the sky and the sails. So the sails look as though they're suspended in mid-air, but that's the next process would be to do the hull underneath those sails and then rig it, as the aerial is in the foreground. And of course the water will give it a bit more movement altogether. Being a broadside view, it looks a little bit stagnant at the moment, but the water will give it more power and movement. So one day I hope to get round to finishing it. These ships were around about 900 tonnes, built specifically for the China tea trade, and they were kept up like yachts, beautifully painted. All the brassware was highly polished, and each year they had a race back from China. The first ship home got a bonus for the tea, because having tea on the market first, they got the best price. But this particular year, 1866, when 6 berthed on the same tide, there was such a glut of tea on the market that nobody could sell their tea because there was too much of it. So the actual bonus was dropped then for a few years after that. You can see the stunsels or stunsels, which were the flying kites, and were set with the following wind. A marine artist needs quite a good library, reference library, and this is part of my collection, which I've been collecting for over 30 years. Every book, mainly on sailing ships, rigs, hull construction, histories of all the 19th and 20th and 16th and 17th century vessels. Apart from my own limited edition prints, which I produce for my own work, I've had quite a number of my other paintings reproduced on various calendars and book covers over the years. This one is Thermopylae, the famous tea clipper, great rival of Cutty Sark, and that was my second series painting of ship I did in 1958. Next one is the famous American clipper Sea Witch, and I was quite fortunate to have this on the cover of Greyhounds of the Sea. This is the 3rd edition of the particular book, the first being published in 1930. It's a historic record of all the famous American clippers. The most recent book to be produced with my picture on the jacket is The Explorers of the Pacific by Geoffrey Badger. This is a new publication and deals with the whole Pacific exploration. And of course Alan Villiers is a very well known sea writer who's written a dozen books over the years on his own experiences, and this is This particular one is Captain James Cook and features inside an illustration from my painting of the Endeavour, as does this final book here on different wrecks on the Western Australian coast, and features the Endeavour painting of mine. Marine painting has just been a hobby over the years to me, and it's a hobby that's grown into a professional vocation. I was in printing, in litho printing. I was a dot etch combiner, so they work hand in hand. I produce limited edition prints for my work, and I supervise them right through. And I've been lucky with the quality of the printing. It's been superb, and I've won 2 gold medals, one for the arrival of the First Fleet, and another gold medal for the Sabroan loading wool in Sydney Cove. Also, for the out of the 27 categories, I won the Sulks and Clare Award, which is the best printed job of all for 1987 in the Australian National Print Awards. The British clipper Sabroan loading wool, Circular Key 1871. This is my layout drawing and preliminary drawing and sketch for the proposed painting. This is a close-up of the bow showing some of the detail of the figurehead. And then we go into the actual painting itself. The building in the immediate background is still there at Circular Quay. The whole scene is the west side of Circular Quay looking across to the north shore. The clipper Sabroan was a British clipper built for the Australian immigrant trade, and she usually came out in January and went back with wool. On the right side hand of the picture are these horses just standing outside the Orient Hotel. On the footpath is an old salt with a little dog. That was based on a friend of mine. The horse in the foreground just is actually used to haul the wool aboard. The tackle goes down to the wharf and up to the yard arm and down to the wool bales, which are hauled up by walking the horse away. The yard arm is then swung around and the horse is backed up and the wool is dropped on deck and then loaded down into the holds. Nippon Maru, built in Japan for sail training back in 1930. It has been disused now. A new vessel has taken its place by the same name. This is a small painting which is 13 inches by 18 approximately, and was done initially for the Franklin Mint in the USA. There was approximately 500 hours involved in that particular picture. My first acrylic painting back in 1965 of Captain Cook's famous vessel, the Endeavour. These were sturdy little vessels built for the North Sea coal trade. Cook had his choice of any of the vessels in the Navy. He was brought up on these coal boats and decided that they were very sturdy and strong and very accessible to being beached and careened for repairs if necessary. And this is the main reason he chose them. He used a similar type of vessel on the whole 3 voyages. Of discovery in 1770. Broadside view of the same little vessel, the Endeavour, shows a very bluff bow, no decoration or figurehead. The original vessel was the Earl of Pembroke, built in 1868, and of course renamed Endeavour when Cook took it over in 1869. She actually went ashore off on the reef up in Brisbane, and luckily, because of her size, she was easily to be repaired and refloated. Cuddy Sark, built in 1869, built specifically for the China tea trade, and was a great success later on in the Australian wool trade. She's built in the year 1869, as I said, and this was a very important year for the clippers because the Suez Canal was opened that year, and it gave an edge to the steamships of the time. Thermopylae, also built for the tea trade, a year before Cutty Sark. Both Cutty Sark and Thermopylae ended up in their later life in Portugal, with their home port of Lisbon. Fortunately for Cutty Sark, she was saved by a wealthy ship lover. Cutty Sark was restored in Greenwich and still survives. And Thermopylae, seen here, was torpedoed and sunk in 1907. Penelope, a steel four-masted bark, was used primarily for the wheat trade in South Australia in the late 1920s. Took grain back to Europe from South Australia. Those early paintings were gouache, a pencil drawing of golden plover. I spent 2 years as a crew member on this little vessel, which was restored in Melbourne on the Melbourne River back in 1970 to 76. I did a trip up to the Whitsunday Passage, and it was also used in the film Eliza Fraser, of which I was lucky enough to be part of the crew while the filming was being done. Clipper Sea Witch, American built, and built in 1846 also for the tea trade, and a replica is being planned to be built in the United States of this vessel, and hopefully they can raise the $18 million needed to build it and retrace its original voyage. This is acrylics, and the painting took 500 to 600 hours to complete. And eventually this particular vessel, the original one, was wrecked on the island of Cuba in 1856. Pencil drawing of the Polly Woodside. This is one of 4 paintings I did for Franklin Mint. This is the preliminary drawing. I had to do a preliminary drawing to be okayed by Franklin Mint before I actually started the painting. This depicts her just coming in through Port Phillip Heads back in about 1885. The flags flying from her mizzen gaff represent her number, which is a code signifying her name. The little topsail schooner Enterprise, built in Launceston in Tasmania by John Pascoe Faulkner. Faulkner was co-founder of Melbourne with John Batman. John Batman came into Port Phillip Bay 2 weeks before this little vessel, the Enterprise, and this picture shows her off the heads, looking from the outside, looking in. You've got Point Nepean on the right-hand side, and Queenscliff in the extreme background. John Pascoe Faulkner was a convict himself at one stage, and he was quite an enterprising fellow. Opened a newspaper in Launceston, and finally settled in the Yarra near Batman's own house. And this shows her coming through the heads in heavy seas. Enterprise is typical of the little vessels built in Australia in the early part of settlement. Polly Woodside again, a large painting I did. The original took me over 1,000 hours, and the size is 6 feet long by 30 inches high. In the Melbourne River at Footscray in Victoria. And from the actual hulk I made a rough sketch, and then from all the other information such as plans, photographs, which were collected by the National Trust, I reconstructed the vessel, how she looked in her heyday, and of course how she looks this very day now, restored in all her splendour in Melbourne, in dry dock. She forms the nucleus of the Melbourne Maritime Museum, and just won a World Award for rigging. I did a number of early historical paintings on Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. This is the Waroona, early paddle steamer which was used on Port Phillip Bay in the early part of this century. This was based on an early photograph dated about 1910 at the pier in Portsea. She was later broken up, I think around about 1946 she went up to Taiwan area where she was broken up, and she was the last of the bay steamers on Port Phillip Bay. Francis Xavier Church circa 1930, and one of Nepean Highway Frankston in 1910. Frankston again in 1910, Oliver's Hill. You can see on the extreme left-hand side a horse and cart and a little girl and little dog walking along the road. This is also acrylics. These are fairly quick paintings for me. I think this one was 60 hours, so they are quite quick. The Peru entering Port Phillip Heads in 1852. This was just during the gold rush. The Hamburg, the vessel was from Hamburg, registered in Hamburg. You can just see coming into view the flag of Hamburg flying from the mizzen gaff. She was commissioned by the British government to bring out immigrants at that time, 1852. Just coming into view now is a little ketch, a Tasmanian training ketch, were very common. The late 19th century. 18th century. It shows Nepean, Point Nepean in the background, an outward bound blackball frigate seen on the extreme right there. She would have gold bullion from the gold diggings in Victoria. Similar type of this, a very similar type of vessel called the Madagascar left Port Phillip Bay in 1852 with gold bullion and was never seen again. Common occurrence in the days of sail, particularly going round via Cape Horn on the way back to Europe. This is also a large painting in acrylic. It took me over 1,000 hours and is quite detailed. Grace Harbour in heavy weather down south. Grace Harbour was used in the wheat trade from South Australia, and the well-known writer and seaman Alan Villiers sailed on board and did a magnificent film of his voyage back to Europe. The Iron Clipper Lockard was built in 1873, and on its third voyage in 1878 it was wrecked down at Port Campbell on the Victorian coast. 1,600 tonnes, there were 52 souls on board, and of the 52 there were only 2 survivors, Eva Carmichael, one of the passengers on board, and Tom Pearce, one of the apprentices. He was washed overboard trying to get the longboat out and was washed into the gorge, Lockard Gorge, which is named after the vessel. An hour or so later, Eva was seen by Tom on some wreckage in the gorge. He went out and pulled her in. He was awarded by the Board of Trade this medal for gallantry. He was lionised by all the people in Melbourne and was presented with this particular medallion. Eva Carmichael eventually went back to England and married a Captain Townsend, or a Dr. Townsend. Tom Pearce himself was a Newcastle harbour master for a number of years, and the wreck itself is quite inaccessible. It's 90 feet down and has often been dived on by numerous divers. This is 1588 Elizabethan galleon, used during the Spanish Armada by Drake, and was typical of the vessels of those days. Very highly decorated high stern castles, and these were used for by bowmen in fighting, etc. This is one of my early paintings, and I used gouache on this particular one. I didn't use acrylics until 1965. The arrival of the first fleet, 1788. This picture took me over a year to do, and a tremendous amount of research was needed. The background I did from early lithographs of Sydney Cove. It's in acrylics, and even though the picture is quite small, it's 17 inches by 32, and it took over 1,500 hours in time. You can see all the Marines and seamen alongside in this longboat, ready to go ashore from the flagship of the fleet, the HMS Sirius. The red flag you can see in the background is the red ensign used by the fleet. Some of the crew furling the jib on Lady Penrhyn, a pelican in the foreground, which were quite numerous around Sydney Cove at that time. I depicted the actual painting in Sydney Cove, or Circular Quay as it's known now. You can see in the background, the land in the background is where the actual harbour bridge is at the now. The vessel in the foreground is the Prince of Wales, and the longboat seen sailing astern of Prince of Wales is the Sirius's longboat, which was sailed up from Botany Bay where they first anchored. Seamen can be seen shortening sail there. The mainsail is clewed up, ready to furl. And there was over 12 months research involved, looking through the Mitchell Library and inspecting the different journals written by the different commanders of the fleet, finding out which order the ship sailed into the harbour, the weather conditions, light and wind direction. So there's a lot of research involved before you even get to do the actual painting. The Bounty, this was another painting I did for the Franklin Mint. There were 4 altogether, and this was the first offered. There were 18,000 prints printed in Paris at the famous printers Mulho's. Mulho's was used by some of the French impressionists such as Lautrec to do his posters. So the machinery itself was over 150 years old. The lightning is seen here coming through the heads, and she was built in 1854 for the Blackball line in Liverpool, specifically to bring out immigrants here and passengers. She usually went back with wool. The America's Cup, 1983, when we won the America's Cup from the Americans with Australia 2, the famous Australia 2. Liberty is seen there in the foreground, and the Black Knight, the committee boat, there on the right-hand side at the finishing line of the event. This is depicting the 5th heat when we were 3-1 down. We went on to win the next 3 and create maritime history in yachting.
Now I might keep redrawing this, this drawing, reversing it each time and scribbling on the back and amending all the faults I see in it, anything up to 10, 15, 20, 25 times with one that's giving me a lot of difficulty, until I get it to my complete satisfaction. And until I've got the drawing absolutely right, I'd never start to paint a picture. Must get the air bubbles out, because otherwise the thing will dry unevenly and give problems later on. And the other thing that is most important is not to touch the wet paper with the metal ferrule of the brush, because that will produce a score mark in the paper which you can never get rid of. It will be there forever.
To the beginning. I'm just using turpentine because we want to get right over the whole surface fairly quickly in an ordinary house painter's brush which you paint your cupboards with. Now we'll run around the outside of this board here down to the areas where we suspect there's some red, and we'll not go over those at this moment, because if we do, our reds won't be too jolly bright if we have raw umber underneath them and then try and put some red on top. Now, any demarcation there. Now we've got left for ourselves a big light shape, somewhat left of centre, and a thin one down the bottom representing the shirt. Now I think the camera can see those two, and if you half close your eyes and look, you'll see that the board is now beginning to marry with the subject. There's beginning to be a slight lightness. Nothing perfect yet, but on the way. Now then, that's vaguely a thing where a nose will be. Then, of course, we're going to have bits that'll be mouths and all that running in there somewhere or other, and where a beard will be here. Perhaps that could come down now a little lower in that section, all in there. Now there's vaguely where a face will be, vaguely where the shirts and things are, but we'll just tie that shirt up a little more. Always we're going to do a little more. Righto, now where would the shirt be? It stops, you see, just under the nose and where the ear is. It ends up about there. So we did not really have it too badly placed in our very first lay-in.
With these 2-minute poses, what I'm looking for are the shapes, simplified shapes that occur in the figure. So I'm practicing all of these for the longer poses. So this time I'm making more of a geometric shaped figure here. The lovely lean of the head, again the spine.
While I've got that tone, I just look over the rest of the pot and see where I can see that colour reflected. Try not to break it up too much, because it looks far more dramatic if you just have a few tones and some nice strong highlights.
Now, I've got to go right around the cat. Now, this is time consuming. I suggest you put some nice records on your player and sit down and enjoy it, because this, depending on the subject you're doing, is likely to take you a few hours to paint out this cat. What I do is I generally paint out to about that distance around the cat, and then fill the base in, the rest in quickly by squeegeeing some of this over with a piece of cardboard. I'll show you how I do that in a moment. But as you can imagine, this takes a fair bit of detail. Now, when this is dry, the ink will not go through this section that's all blue. It will only go through the section that's open, right? So that leaving you an impression of what you're doing. Now, I turn on my vacuum and it will suck it down tight onto the paper, onto the stock. I lower my screen. I pick up my squeegee. This is the squeegee. It is a nylon blade in a wooden handle, which has got a very sharp, clean edge on it. I use that to scrape the ink.
My name is Paul Miller. We're here today to talk about airbrush equipment and basic technique and maintenance. I have in front of me a variety of airbrush equipment and a variety of different kinds of airbrushes themselves. Alright, so now we're working on surface number 2, but we need to encompass number 1 as well. So let's work on a horizontal basis. Alright, so there we have surface number 2. And this is using a build-up technique where we add to each side as we go. And this is the top, the one that would be most subject to light, which we'll only give a light coating to.
This form of art, which I will show now, is called sumie. Sumie came from Japanese word, meaning sumi is ink, e is a picture. All that strokes are derived from calligraphy. But not that one. That one is expression on the leaf of bamboo. It is specifically sumie. Bamboo is not only black and white, it has a shading, otherwise it will be monotonous.
Hello, I'm Terry Pepperell and I'd like to introduce myself. This is my studio and I have been doing calligraphy for some years. I'd like to try to impart some of my experience onto you today. These feathers here are the tools that were used for some thousands of years before the advent of the steel pen. Hollywood style, they used like this with great long barbs still on. However, they were not used like that for many hundreds of years. They were trimmed down to the bare minimum. Quill was cut, little metal insert, and they were much more utilitarian instrument. Dot and the J. We've already reduced the alphabet by about 9 letters. We do the B. The B is just a vertical stroke, a second stroke of the O, and part of the second stroke, of the first stroke of the O rather, making its third stroke. If you can do the B, you can do the P. we've already done the C here, and the D, and the E. The next letter is the F. Now the F is a straight line, a slight introductory curve to it. Just put it down there. A little top, which is part of the C stroke, and a crossbar. All these little strokes are parts of circles. Imagine that.
Use and the handling of the pen. Right, now here we are. We've taken the watercolour as it exists off the board, and we've come down and laid it onto a table, which is a much more practical way of working with the pen on the onto the wash. The reason for doing this is the fact that where, as I say, just to briefly explain, if we was to do it with the pen while standing up, then your ink runs back, and then therefore it makes it very difficult. So you must be where the ink feeds down onto it. I suppose briefly to give you an outline in regards to these pens, this actually is a rapidograph. They come in various grades, 0.25 I think upwards to thicker nibs, and they deliver the ink through on a pretty even flow. And these, for argument's sake, I have those. I just need these two handles, so that when I have to go to a thicker pen, I can just take screw one out and screw one back in and work from there. Now I'll start to proceed forth with these two. I'll give you an example as we work, because now you're coming down into the category of embellishing your work with pen, and so it can be a very long task or enjoyment, whichever way you like to look at it, to sort of build this up. So what I'll do is we'll give an example of how I apply the pen to get this on its way, and then we'll sort of cut out. I'll do a lot more work on it. We'll come back and show you the progress of it. But let's go for good form now to get these basics in. Let's get the broad lines in. Let's outline these. I'll now start to pick out where I think that these buildings will be, or where we're looking at it overall as an element. So don't try to sort of line out a building specifically individually and finish that off. Keep this design of montage, if you like, of buildings going.